I would have expected him to be here. Something might have come up this morning for him.
Okay, but as far as you knew, he was going to be here. All right. Well, we have a quorum, so I will go ahead and call the meeting to order. And if we have other members joining us, I want to welcome our new member when she comes on board. So I may pause and do some introductions wherever that might happen in the in the mix here. And I don't know if it's possible to reach out just to make sure she's not having technical issues getting logged in. So if that's possible, if we don't see her in a minute, that would be great. So I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. And do we have any changes for the minutes from February 18th?
Unusually enough, I didn't have any changes to the minutes.
Okay, do we have a motion to accept minutes?
I move that we accept the minutes as submitted.
I second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Great, thank you. Well, let's move ahead then. We have public comment. So I don't know if we received any requests for public comment prior to the deadline yesterday.
We did not for this meeting. We did receive a request to speak at the ECFR meeting at 10, but not for this meeting.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay,
That sounds like Karen, but I can't understand what you're saying. Is there a way to be either closer to the microphone or some way to have it?
It's the nature of the mask on our face. Sorry, Bob.
Yeah, it's I'm a little further away from the microphone, Bob, because otherwise the microphone picks up the keyboard typing. So unfortunately, I'm a little muffled.
Or you might want to move down to that chair.
I don't know if these are on. Are these speakers on?
They're on.
They should be. I mean, they can hear us.
I see Les is here.
okay. Okay, well, let's move on while we're sorting out the technical piece of it. I think we can move to the monthly state of the parks.
Good morning. It looks good for us to be able to rebuild the Sitka beach access this fiscal year. We made some adjustments to the plan to save some money and things are moving forward. We spent quite a bit of time, more than usual, with graffiti and sticker removal citywide. I assisted HRAP with removing a big 3,000-pound fish net off the beach a few weeks ago. We've been killing English ivy all around town. There's a lot more to do. Personally, I've been helping with the street department with the stormwater project up on Akola Park Road and the recycling team with the baler repair. I had to pick up some 120 gallons of hydraulic fluid up at Astoria. We've installed new post nets, strap anchor and a strap at the 2nd Street tennis court. I installed a memorial plaque, a bandstand. That program is a success. We picked up 2,000 pounds of turf fertilizer and Joe has just begun to spread that. We removed a broken dead hazard tree at Les Shirley Park under the guidance of our city arborist. And we've received and begun installation of 60 yards of engineered wood fiber that's protective surface at all 3 city playgrounds. End of story.
And that's it.
Thank you.
Okay, Jelaine.
She's talking.
There we go. Okay, I couldn't get to the unmute button. And speaking of unmuting and muting, if you're on the phone and you're not speaking, if you can mute your phone and then just unmute it when you're speaking, well, I'll try to get into that habit. That would be great. And hi, Les, I see that you're with us now. And has Betty joined us? I don't think so yet. Okay, Great. All right, thanks. Any questions or anything follow up on state of the parks? All right. Moving on, right-of-way tree removals. We've got a few applications in the packet. Were there any questions or comments on those? Right. We have a presentation today from the Cannon Beach Friends of the Trees, and I will go ahead and turn it over. Jan Siebert-Warman is going to be speaking to us. And I'll just say, just in terms of the time, because we're working within these funny Zoom time limits, if there are questions we don't get to today, or if we want to have more discussion about this after the presentation, I'll just ask that we put it onto the agenda. If we don't, if we need to kind of work within our time constraints today, I'd like to follow up with it next month so we can make sure we've got time for any follow-up or questions that might come up around this. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Jan.
Good morning, everybody, and Parks and Community Services Committee members and city staff. Thank you for listening to our brief presentation today. And thanks also to all of you for helping our Cannon Beach trees to survive and thrive. As we know, trees play an important role in our town, helping to make it the lovely place it is. They not only enhance our community's natural beauty, they shade our homes, businesses, and streets. They clean our air and our water and help reduce our stormwater runoff. Trees lower our energy costs and increase our property values. Our green infrastructure actually increases in value and service with time. And of course, trees also play a vital role as wildlife habitat. As we mentioned at your meeting last month, one of the main projects we'd like to see in our town is a heritage and significant trees program, where the already established special Cannon Beach trees are located and monitored, and the public is encouraged to nominate more trees for heritage or significant tree status recognition and protection. As you know, thanks to the work of Barb Knopp and other members of this Parks and Community Services Committee, city staff, the city arborist, various volunteers, and others, Cannon Beach is once again designated as a Tree City USA community. The Cannon Beach Heritage and Significant Trees program would serve to further educational, recreational, and environmental preservation purposes, while at the same time enhancing the overall aesthetic values of our community. Mayor Sam has expressed his support for this project and shared with us his desire also for a map of our Cannon Beach special trees. We've thus included in your packets a copy of the Lake Oswego Heritage Trees map as a possible example for Cannon Beach to follow. Also in your packets are some informational sheets from the Portland Heritage Tree Program and an actual heritage tree nomination form for possible use in the Cannon Beach Heritage and Significant Trees Program. Heritage trees are those which are significantly large in height, diameter, or both, are significantly old, are located in a specific area, are of a unique or rare species, are of a particular horticultural interest and or have a documented history. Significant trees, such as those like the old, sadly now gone, Cannon Beach wedding tree, could be a part of the program as well, and their inclusion might be a way to stimulate even more community excitement and participation. At the suggestion of our Cannon Beach City Planning and Community Development Director, Jeff Adams, we've already given presentations to the Cannon Beach Garden Club and the Cannon Beach Planning Commission in regard to this Heritage and Significant Trees program, and we've received enthusiastic support. Both Jeff Adams and the Planning Commissioners suggested that the appropriate group to guide this process further would be the Parks and Community Services Committee, which acts as our Cannon Beach Tree Board. This group would be the appropriate body to create specific criteria, guidelines, and a public nomination process for the city program, with a final decision-making taking place at the city council level. It's our understanding that trees in Cannon Beach, which currently have some special protection and which are thus required to be pruned in conformance with the International Society of Arboriculture, ISA, pruning standards, and which have been referred to in years past at city meetings as Cannon Beach heritage trees, are those which are 1, more than 30 feet in height, 2, more than 30 inches in diameter, 3, south of Acola Creek, the trees located west of Hemlock Street, and 4, north of Acola Creek, the trees located west of Laurel Street. These rules are listed under Chapter 17.70.030, Additional Requirements of the Cannon Beach Tree Ordinance of our Cannon Beach Municipal Code, and you can see Section J, items 1, 2, 3, and 4. In closing, we'd like to offer you our assistance in mapping and monitoring the heritage and significant trees, and in any other way you would see fit. Our Cannon Beach trees are one of our community's greatest assets. Let's all come together to take care of them for both present and future generations, residents and visitors alike. Thank you. And we'll give a copy of this presentation letter to Kelsey so that you can all have it if you need to refer to it.
Thank you, Jan. That's great. I would like to just open it up for any questions. We've had a chance to look at the materials in the packet and a couple of examples from different cities. So if anyone has questions or would like some follow-up information, let's just kind of open it up here and we will. We've got a few minutes here that we can talk about this proposal. So the floor is-
Dan?
Yeah.
This is Bob. Could I make a suggestion when you pass that along to Kelsey? If you can, if we can get the sample map of heritage trees of Lake Oswego with a little more contrast or less contrast, whatever it is, because right now there's a lot of background stuff that's not visible, and so it's not a very instructive map the way it is. And I think it would be. We have just the darker content of it, I'd say, or at least I do.
Okay. Okay, I'll
Thanks.
try to do that with Kelsey. Thank
Thanks.
you.
And thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, I think this is a wonderful idea. I know that when I've been in Portland and I've been in other communities, it's always wonderful to be out on a walk or in the woods somewhere or even in the town and then come upon a tree that has been identified as a heritage tree. Sometimes it's in someone's yard, sometimes it's in a park, but it's always it's a great thing to learn a little bit more about them and appreciate the trees. It always draws my attention to the trees more generally when a city has a program like that. So I think that's a great thing, and it's really consistent with us being a Tree City USA.
Yeah, Jelaine, this is Les. Jan, thank you very much. This seems like a wonderful thing to me. I'm curious though, do the trees once identified become in some way more protected? What comes of being identified as a heritage tree besides being identified?
Well, I think that they would be more protected and they would be more monitored. And, so that is a good thing for any tree, I think. And so that would be the hope, that they would be more protected and they would also just be more featured. When I think that's why Mayor Sam was excited about this. He thought that possibly when people would visit our town, that they would be able to get a map of these wonderful trees and be able to enrich their experience here and appreciate what we have. And even people living here would have a more educated view of trees. So that's basically what our goal would be, was more education, recreation, and environmental protection for the trees.
This is Kurt.
Les,
Yes.
in the material that Jan forwarded to us, the first page that has at the top Portland Parks and Recreation, about 2/3 of the way down, it's got some stuff about what does it mean to have a heritage tree on private property and protections and so forth there.
Thanks, Bob. Obviously, I haven't read that in nearly enough detail.
I just read it a few minutes ago.
Take care of that.
This is Kirk. For instance, in Portland, if a heritage tree needs a permit to be pruned, and otherwise trees don't need a permit to be pruned, for example.
All right, thank you.
Great. Well, is there more discussion on this? Is this something that we'd like to go ahead and recommend to go forward to council as a proposal for our city?
I would recommend that. Do I have to formulate that into an articulate motion?
I don't think so. Do we need a formal vote on this? Is this something we can do with consensus? I suppose we can vote and
Make a motion to adopt this as a agenda item and initiative that you guys pursue.
great. So do we have a motion to that effect?
I so move.
Great. Is there a second?
I
I
second.
second.
Okay. Those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Great. Well, we will move forward with this then. And thank you again, Jan, for bringing this to our city. And I think it'll be a wonderful connection with Friends of the Trees and with another element of the Parks Committee and for the city in general. So thank you.
Thank
Jelaine,
you.
if I can quick add one more thing. I was able to find a better version of that Lake Oswego Heritage Trees map. It's actually on their website, so it's got a lot more of the color definition that Bob requested. So I'm actually going to email that to you guys so that you can see it. Apologies that I didn't notice the version from Jan didn't have the, when it got scanned through to get included in the packet, it lost a lot of the color definition. So I'll be sending that over to you guys. So Jan, don't need to worry about getting me that piece.
Okay, thanks.
Great. Okay, thank you so much. Moving on, we've got a very short item for Ecola Creek Forest Reserve today because we're going to be having a long discussion very shortly. But there was one thing I wanted to just follow up on, as we had an email from a member of the public who has some acres adjacent to the reserve, and there had been an email about some timber that they were wondering if there was an option to salvage some of that for firewood. So I think either Trevor or Karen was going to follow up on that. And do we have anything to report on that?
Yes, I talked to the gentleman about it, and it was just more of a history lesson of in years past, residents were able to go out in the ECFR and chop up firewood that it's laying on the ground. He wasn't looking to do that. It was just more of a, hey, we used to be able to do this. And that's kind of where we left it. He wasn't looking to go out there and start chopping on down trees.
Okay, great. I didn't know if there was a specific
It's set
specific
up.
bunch of wood that he had his eye on or was concerned about. So, okay, great.
I'm curious, as long as this came up, Trevor, what were you able to tell him as far as whether that would be allowed? My guess is that it would be no.
Yeah, it's not allowed at this time, no. I'm not looking to even discuss that any further about allowing that to happen.
Good.
All right, I'm having a little fun with my mute on and off, so sorry if I get hung up with that a little
I
bit.
think people see, because there's several locations out in the ECFR where we have timber stacked up, nice straight timber. We keep stacked up for emergency use. I think people see that sometimes and they go, man, that's pretty easy to access and cut up for firewood. But we keep that stockpiled for public works and for emergency use only.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, it wasn't clear to me if it was something that had to do with the border of his property or not, but I think that's all been resolved. So, okay, great. All right, thank you. I just want to check in. Do we have Betty with us?
Do we have a contact number?
I saw another phone number, so, okay, all right. Great. So our next item is the 2020 audit. And I think, Karen, you were going to speak to that?
The report was presented to the council in the last council work session. Obviously, if you guys have had a chance to look at it, it is a very positive report. The auditor actually presented the report to the council, and he really commended Cannon Beach as being one of the beach communities that is the most ADA accessible from all the communities that he audits. And so that's a tribute to this entire team here that we've done a lot to improve our beach accesses, keeping the ramps clean, improving our trails, and adding additional pocket parks that are ADA accessible. And so he was thrilled to see that. We took him over to the surf shop. We introduced him to the owner there that manages the wheelchairs. And he also told him about the additional sports that they're working with state parks to get permits for like a surfing type sport that they're going to be offering for physically limited folks. And so the auditor was quite excited about that. He has a relative that he knows enjoys that particular sport. So he's anxious to see Cannon Beach offer that. So we're going to be following up with him and letting him know kind of the status of things so that he can help promote that for us. But a couple of things that he did note in the report, if you've had a chance to look at it, is our Talahana vehicle ramp needs some attention. And we talked to him about our master plan project that's documented in our master plans of our desire to redo that ramp. And so we just had an opportunity to pursue a $100,000 grant that we may qualify to get that would allow us to go after that project. So I'm pursuing that because of the timing that the money came our way. And I threw it out there for you guys to give me feedback, as I did several other forums of folks that are interested in that particular part of our community, and they have expressed concerns. And a lot of feedback that I've gotten is they want to see us redesign that ADA ramp, i.e. eliminate that and make it part of the vehicle ramp. So that would be the goal if we get that 100,000, but that particular project would probably be in excess of $250,000 to do it. But our desire is to be able to do that. And because it's a master plan project and it also is a ADA spirited project, we kind of kill multiple birds with one stone. So hopefully you guys will give me a nod that you think that that's a good project for us to pursue. And I did get your project list, and I see that you guys have noted some projects on there that came from the ADA report.
I've got a quick question, and this is more general, but it pertains here. I know, now I believe that the Tolovana area, that is Oregon State Parks, is that correct?
We actually own the vehicle ramp, the city does. The state owns the property that our ADA ramp, the switchback ramp, actually sits on. We had to get permission from them to actually build that ramp because it's on their property. So the idea would be to eliminate that, because that's quite an extensive cost for us every year to keep that cleaned off. We have to get help from a subcontractor to do that. And so it's an ongoing cost to the city. We can eliminate that when we redo that vehicle ramp by making that one and the same.
Yeah.
We would add the ADA ramp. In fact, there's an area in Longview, Washington, that is doing theirs right now. And there was an article in the paper that Paul brought me, my roads lead. And I'm kind of digging into that and working with that city to find out who did their design for that. Because ideally, that's what we would want to do. They're doing the same thing as a vehicle ramp, boat ramp, emergency access, and ADA access.
Great.
That was Westport that was doing that.
Yeah, Westport, somewhere out in that area.
In case anybody wants to look up the article.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So my question was, I think that's great information. And it was, I'm thinking back to, Tolovana isn't in our regular state of the park. So, there's been a little bit of, it's been in a little bit different category. So that's good to know that the ramp would be, this project would be on the city-owned land. And I don't know that we included projects in Tolovana in that list for that reason. We hadn't talked about that previously, but we could certainly reconsider that in our discussion coming up. So thank you for that. Anything else related to the ADA audit before we move into projects? And there's a lot of overlap there for us, so maybe that will.
That's all I had. If you guys want, give me some feedback based on your review of it, I'd love to have it.
I've got one thing, it's something to think about, and it's also in the ADA report, is Well Park is getting an ADA accessible ramp there at Whale Park. We kind of have a natural trail as it exists now. And I think it wouldn't take too much work to get the slopes right to make that an accessible access point. Because we have Tolovana, we have Gower, and it just makes sense to have something at Whale Park for accessibility. That's my thought.
So is your thought that it would just be a question of the slope primarily? It wouldn't be a new location. It would be just working with
It would be the same location. It's just, the surface would have to change and the sloping would have to change on it. But when I talked to the ADA guy personally, he says that's you guys should put some focus into Well Park because that'd be a great area to have an access point.
And it doesn't have to be a concrete surface. It
No.
could be a firm, hard surface of packed gravel that's a certain size. And so it's not like we would be putting a concrete path down like what's at Tullabonna.
And Well Park makes more sense than Les Shirley Park, just because Les Shirley Park would be hard to make that work for 88 accessibility. And the sand's really soft there.
It's tidal,
Yeah,
it's underwater.
so that's my 2 cents on it.
Great, thank you. Anything else on this before we move to projects? Okay, thank you. All right, so we have a little chunk of time here. We can focus on our projects for the coming year. And I sent everybody a couple of handouts. The first one being that just the index of projects. I just tried to create a listing here so we could see the way that we rank them and how that all fell out in the listing together. And it looks like, first, are there any questions about how that was laid out or how I arrived at that ranking based on everybody's individual lists? Pretty clear. Okay. So you'll see that the top 4 were ones that all 5 members voted on and included in their lists. And top among those is the kiosk and signage updates in the ECFR. I'm taking these as separate categories. So ECFR and then the city. And road naming, Blackberry pilot project and beaver restoration ongoing. And you can just see them as they are in order there based on the number of votes. And then same thing in the projects for the city. Top of the list was the Midtown restroom upgrade. And then moving down through some of the other items. With pickleball striping, I included it because it was included in folks' lists, but and I did give it its average ranking. My sense is that we are largely, as the committee, that has moved on now to the intersection of the city with the folks who are wanting to manage storage of the nets. We've given a recommendation to the city that we think that would be a good idea to go ahead, and some general outline as to the configuration of that, but the details to be worked out by the city as they're the ones who are going to need to work within their parameters. So that was the reasoning there. So any questions or thoughts, thoughts about how you might want to go forward with this discussion?
Shalane, this is Karen. What I really need from you guys today is to give me your top 3 or 4 projects. And you guys be in agreement with those, because what I'll need to do, since this committee does not have a budget, is I need to get a quote on what those projects would cost and include that when I go forward to the budget committee here in the coming weeks. So the sooner you guys can come to an agreement, the better I'll be in being able to ask for money that will support these projects.
Okay, great. Well, apropos or just conversation we just had then, do we want to include that ramp at Tolivana, because that wasn't one of the ones listed? And if so, is that something, I know you were talking about the grant monies, is that something that would require budget?
No, I think you make a good point. It's not one in one of the city's parks. I like to get you guys' perspective because it is a park, and even though we partner with state parks to accomplish things, I like to get your perspective on things that sometimes is not in your purview of making decisions, but I like to get your perspective. So if you'll accommodate me and just picking your brain a little bit, that's what the Tullabonna ramp was about. Not so much for you to make a decision if it's going to be a project or not, but just getting your feeling on if you think this is something out of the ADA report that I should pursue via that grant opportunity that came our way.
This is
Uh-huh.
I got a little background. Tullabonna Wayside is state parks. However, we have gentlemen agreements over the years The playground at Tolovana Wayside belongs to the city, we maintain it. We have dog poop bag boxes that belong to the city, we maintain them, they're attached to state park garbage cans. There's a public art sculpture that belongs to the city, it's in Tolovana Wayside. So this is it's kind of a cooperative relationship. It is all state parks, but we do play a role there.
It's been a partnership with us and state parks forever, so.
Yeah, it shouldn't be something you guys ignore, I guess.
Well, as we're, before we maybe dive in, because we do have a very clear ranking on the other topics that we've listed here, is that something that we would support? And do people have specific feedback or thoughts for Karen on the Tolovana ramp? If not, we can always come back to that next time, just give it a little bit more thought. But anything that anyone wants to add on that right now?
And just to be clear, that project would not compete with anything else that you guys have on your list here. Again, it's just your perspective of how you feel about that.
Great,
Okay.
thanks.
I'm not sure that I understood completely what was said about that, but it sounds like we're talking about getting rid of the present ADA ramp, which is a lot of trouble and expense and isn't always accessible anyway, and doing something to the vehicle ramp so that it can also be used for ADA access. Did I get that right?
Well, it's actually vice versa. First and foremost is our vehicle ramp is in disrepair. And so if we're going to spend money to have to rebuild that, now would be the time to include the ADA in that. And so the driver of the discussion is the fact that the vehicle ramp needs to be addressed. And it's in poor condition. So if we're going to spend the money to do that, now's the time to talk about addressing the fact that the ADA ramp is it's effective in its purpose, but it's in the wrong position. It's a bad design, and we have an opportunity to redo that. If we do it at the same time, we're going to be redoing the vehicle ramp.
And would it involve widening the vehicle ramp or something like that in order to make it also function as an ADA ramp?
Above slopes,
Yeah, all the above.
everything.
So the slopage and you've seen some of the vehicle boat ramps that are they got the little tiny lines in them where if somebody's rolling something down, it slows it down. That's the idea that Westport's doing with theirs, including ADA. It's the slopage, it's the texture of the ramp, and which enables it to be both ADA and vehicle.
Great.
Sounds great.
Now, having opened that up, I also just took a look at the clock, so I'm gonna, yeah. So maybe we can give this some thought. It sounds like there's a general sense that it would be a good project, but if we have more specific feedback or questions for Karen on the ramp revamp, maybe we can bring those to her directly or also at our meeting next month. So let's bring this one forward just for any follow-up next month. So on our top projects in the ECFR, we have the kiosk and signage updates. I think we need to get some, we have talked about some different ways of approaching that, changing the configuration of the kiosk, adding a panel. I think we've had discussions last year about the basic information that we want to include on it, and we want to consolidate the signs that are up there now. But in terms of budget and getting estimates, because we are likely to not have a chance to get detailed discussion on, drilling down on what that design might be. I'm looking for some input here on how we can best pursue that just in a budgetary sense, because that is that's the top priority that we've identified.
I think to get a quote, you just basically have to have a size sign that you're talking about, and an example of the material that you'd want the sign out of. So if you want it to look like some of the other interpretive signs that are around town, you would point to one of those signs and say, I want it to look something like this. Don't get so hung up on the text as it is the size and the material, and we can get a quote.
Yeah.
Trevor's gonna lead that effort because I have a conflict of interest because my spouse is the local sign person in town. So your feedback would go to Trevor and he would handle all that. I can give input in our discussion, but Trevor would handle all that. But that's what he would need in order for me to get a quote and be prepared to go to the budget committee with what you need budget-wise to get your sign made.
Okay, so on time, do we have a window here where we can revisit this specific question about the kiosk design next month? And have a chance to consider that between, we could get an estimate on essentially a larger version of what we have, or we could get an estimate on having 2 panels instead of 1, maybe in a V. But I think there are some details here that I don't think we have at hand, and we don't have time, as is often the case, to have a fulsome discussion of that amongst ourselves. So what's the deadline in terms of you needing to have a number, Karen, to get to?
I need to have the cost nailed down within the next 3 weeks for sure. I couldn't go any further than that. Really, 2 is ideal, but if I have to wait till next month's committee meeting, we're past the time.
Okay, well, this actually brings up, and I'm going to mention this again at go to the order, but this really brings up the question of work sessions. Our committee has a lot of work to do. It involves sometimes planning events. It involves a lot of this kind of thing that we need discussion on. And I am just experiencing that 10 minutes, even 20 minutes a month, we just aren't able to have the kind of follow-up discussions with each other that we need to really be able to give staff the input they're asking for. So I'll bring that up again later, but I just want to put a pin in that right now. So road naming is the second one. That's not going to cost anything. That's just us. And I thought we had a suggestion there from Bob about one way to approach the road naming and the map update. The Blackberry pilot project, there is I think, estimate in the plan update as an idea for that. But what I wanted to ask folks here, one thing I proposed was that the first phase of the Blackberry update project be doing that planning, understanding what's the goal, what are the methods how are we going to measure it, and talking about possibly linking that with some other project. For example, if we're already doing work in the ECFR on another project, that might either open up or be an opportunity to do some Blackberry, a Blackberry pilot project, that we have those discussions before we try to get into budget, because I don't think we can know what we're talking about. So that was my thought with that, but does that seem a reasonable place to start? And do we think that that would be, that would take up our first year with this, or do we want to really try to get a budget item for this year? So feedback on that one.
I'm willing to kick the can down the road.
Well, one thing I think we could do right away was to start getting, so I think we have different kind of arms of the octopus here. One of them is that the city's already doing mowing of blackberries in some areas along the roadsides and where it's accessible to do that. So part of what this might be is starting to just get information from the city. How often do they do that? How starting to monitor how quickly do they come back? What time of year is that effective? So I think a lot of this is going to be having a framework for how we approach doing it's a pilot project, so we want it to be well thought out. We want people to be able to understand what they're looking at, and we want to be able to collect data in a organized way so it can be useful for whoever's looking at it down the road. And it seems like those are things that are going to take some discussion prior to budgeting the item itself. So I've got one in favor of kicking the can a little bit and doing some work there. Is there anything that would argue against that, or do we need to get this, try to shape this up as a budget item before next month? Stacy, I think you're muted. Were you talking?
Muted myself, sorry. The only problem is blackberries just keep growing. So I think the sooner we can discuss it, the better.
Yeah, I agree. We would need to, like I said, I think there are different versions of this. There are the smaller little ones that have maybe been dropped in the more interior areas. And then is there a spot there that we really want to choose as a test site to work with some of these manual and mechanical methods where you'd go in more with a small crew? That's a different thing than the city doing mowing where it can mow. So I think we've got just different things to assess and identify here first. And maybe this speaks again to the question of work sessions. It's hard to do this in a 10-minute window each month. So recognize that too. There are other thoughts on this?
Yeah, this is Les. I would like to see us pilot something this year. Just so we can gather data. I don't know how significant a budget item it might be, but this would be a good year to get some data going into maybe the budget cycle for next year.
Thanks. And maybe as we start honing in on what this plan might look like and what an initial test site might be, we'll be able to see. We might be able to do a very kind of the first phase of that and start to get some data and see what might be involved. I know Barb has lots of experience with blackberries, and some few others do too, but we can maybe look down the road. In terms of budget, let's look at the plan update and see if that seems reasonable. I don't have that right at my hand at this moment, but I know he did talk about blackberries in there and in the as one of the projects. So it's in the proposed projects and budget section. So let's maybe think about that as a starting framework. I think that would give us a ballpark and some leeway to work with for this year. And then we can drill down on it a little bit more as we go forward. So those are the top three in the ECFR. I think beaver restoration is ongoing. That's more dependent on grants and partnerships and some of the work we've been doing with other folks. And I think that's going to be continuing on. The Midtown restroom upgrade was top of the list for the projects within the city. And I don't know where that is in terms of the city now. Is that something that's already in the works or?
Already on my list to go to the budget committee, and it's going to involve both grants and TLT money. And so I have no idea what their position will be since everybody's trying to dig into the TLT budget. Right now, I don't know where this will fall, but it's definitely a very strong need that the city has. So I'm going to be prepared to really passionately present my case on this need. And so as long as you guys are in agreement with that, it looks like everybody has that as a number one. I think that's the most we can hope for because it is going to be an expensive project.
Great. I think we're nearing. Oh, I'm sorry.
Not to spend any time on the beaver restoration because the North Coast Water Council is pursuing the grant for that, and the city will partner with them on it, but I wouldn't spend any of your time on it. That it gives you the time you need on the real stuff you should be focusing on.
Yeah, great, thank you. Well, I want to be mindful of the time. We still have 12 days of Earth Day to discuss, but I think we have at least a priority list. I think the real question is the kiosk and signage. So again, I'm just going to really advocate for some version of a work session between now and next meeting so that we can actually move forward on this. So Barb, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you for 12 days. And
Shalane, if I could just make a suggestion, what would be most helpful, and I think a few times we've been able to do this and it worked really well, is that instead of allowing your agenda to get so voluminous with many different topics, which forces you to only have 5 or 10 minutes to talk, you really narrow your focus on your agendas. Even if something has to be pushed to the next month, it's really worth it because at least you're making progress on the things that you have on your agenda to talk about, and you have enough time to talk about it. And so if you could strive to do that, I think we would be able to make a lot more progress, and we're not having to have additional meetings. I spend a lot of my time in nighttime meetings here with the commission and the council and the special meetings. And I'm not excited about having additional meetings. So I really ask the committees that I chair to stay focused for that reason.
I understand. I appreciate that. And I know that we'll do our best with that. And I think that's a good direction to go. And also, you know, the committee will need to have the time to do the work that it needs to do. And if we can't do it inside that window, I think we need to make another arrangement. So we can follow up about that later. I want to turn it over to Barb now so that we can.
And one more thing, Julie. If you could assign some things to each of your members where they do some due diligence and bring those things back to your meeting, then you've got some background to actually talk about.
Yeah, and that's actually a suggestion, and I'll just very quickly say that second handout, that's the circle. Let's come back to that next month because that is a plan and a possible way to approach working with our projects, and it does suggest that we assign 1 or 2 members of the committee per project to head that up, to be kind of the point person for that project so that they can be following it, bringing questions to the committee. And we're not trying to do all of this as a group together, but they can come back with that. So we'll follow up on that next month. And Barb, for 12 days.
Okay, I'm kind of waiting for some direction from the city as to how we should plan.
Rick and Bruce sent me a document late last night, and it really is reiterating what the governor already has in place, and I will forward that out to you guys. And Rick, please correct me if I say something wrong, Kamaya. I think that doing a lot of in-person things right now is sensitive to a lot of people, but I think Rick can speak to kind of what we can do based on the governor's orders that are in place right now.
So there's still a statewide mask mandate that's still in place.
Yeah.
Since we're in the low risk category, that does allow us to use the largest amount of people in the venues. So it's up to 300 people that can be used in a venue, and you still have to have social distancing and masks. Those are the only real requirements. I sent Karen those requirements in writing, and they've been very consistent throughout this process. So there's no unknown hurdles within that. And so as long as we stick with those guidelines, you should be in a good position to make any further decisions. The risk mandates that are going down right now, they extended it to a month. And right now our numbers are still trending that we'll probably stay in the low risk category for several weeks now. And that's where our fingers are crossed to keep watching that. But I would say for the next 6 weeks that we should have in the low category and in the best position to have whatever event we're planning.
I'll forward those to you as soon as we're done here.
Okay. So for example, can we have a parade?
As long as you could do social
I
distancing,
think
you
so. I
absolutely
mean, they're
could.
masked up and you guys can stay apart. I don't see a reason why not. I
Okay.
mean, you may get some feedback from folks as we do every day,
Right.
why we're allowing certain things. But if you really look at the guidelines that Rick put out, we're within those.
Okay,
But just be prepared for some pushback on some people
Right.
feeling we shouldn't be doing it.
Right.
So strike some balance between that. But I think anything outside, like Rick says, I mean, we've got the ample space.
Right.
And it can still be a celebration. I think everybody's safe in doing that.
okay,
And we should know well within a week before the date changes, or at least 4 days before the date changes if our risk factor changes. We
Okay.
will know.
That was my question.
We will know.
Are we at any risk of that changing, when we start setting up all these plans, if they're spending money to do this, back from us?
It possibly can, but we'll know 4 days ahead of time and it'll be projected. We get daily updates of the case count in the county.
Right.
And we will know if that starts trending upward, and we just got to pay attention to where that's going. Right now, we're still in the low category, and until we get into extreme category, we'd have to rebound all the way back to the extreme category to where you wouldn't be able to do this at all.
Okay,
That help?
yeah, a lot. So does anybody have anything to report on events that they've got planned? Bob, Stacy?
No,
Why did it start already?
In terms of the parade, I was waiting to hear on this, and I think we'll need some discussion. The only, my first thought, if we try to do that, would be to actually make some structure as part of the parade that actually keeps people at the right distance. I think that's going to be the challenge with anything, is people tend to drift when they're, activities outdoors, and I think we'll need to think clearly about how to make that social distancing happen if we move forward to this. I know we've got were there other reports on the 12 days?
So Stacy, how are you feeling about the street fair? Do you think that is something that we can safely do this year?
I think we can safely do it. I think people will be a little closer than 6 feet at times, but I think we can do it. I have a list of who participated in the past. Out. There are a couple of organizations, Friends of Hastings, Eastside Aquarium.
Okay.
We get support.
Okay, so I would say we,
The street fair, it happens to be on the street where we have some restaurants that are wanting to have their dining out into the street. And so I don't know how that's going to compete with that. So is that the location you want to do it?
yeah.
Okay, so
but
I'll meet
it's-
with Jeff and we'll contact the restaurants and see if that's going to be a problem with what they're trying to do right now.
And normally the street fair is 11 to 1, so
Okay.
it shouldn't.
I'll
Yeah.
get on that right away.
Yeah. Okay, so I would say keep plugging along and be flexible, ready to pivot as we've been doing. Thank you.
Okay,
So-
great, thanks.
Elaine, would you like me to send you some dates that I'm available that you guys could do a workshop to talk about your projects for budget? Would that be helpful?
That's fine, and thank you, yes. And, also just as a note, I know your schedule's very busy. In the past, when we were in person, we would very often have a work session. Jen would set up the recorder. We would have the work session and that would be recorded and noted. So it was within the rules, but if you weren't available or if staff wasn't available to sit in directly on all of that, I think there's some flexibility with the work sessions. So I appreciate that. I would love to know when you are available, and we may need to avail ourselves of some version of that, either by phone or Zoom. I know that also requires technical folks from the city to make that happen. So thank you, and we'll move forward. I know we've got a full meeting coming up back to back with this, so I appreciate that. Do we have anything else for good of the order before we adjourn? Okay, thank you all very much. I appreciate it, and I will adjourn this portion of the meeting, and then I think staff will be taking it from here. Oh, pardon me, before I saw, was that, did we see Patty? Or, I'm sorry, Betty at the end there?
You did.
Did, okay, oh darn,
I think he
okay.
came and went.
Did she?
She dropped off.
She did drop off. Okay, that was my last item, was I was going to welcome her at the end since we couldn't welcome her at the beginning, but we will come back around to that. Okay, we are adjourned. Thanks.
Elaine,
Hang on a second.
just a question. And first of all, I don't know if anybody wants to take a break before we start the next meeting, but do you want to introduce Barry and start talking? Or would you like staff to go ahead and go through our information? We really haven't talked about how to run the meeting.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, we haven't. The agenda that we received from staff had the parks going, I mean, there was an order of speaking there. So we can go with that as far as I'm concerned.
And to start things off, just for clarification, so Jelaine actually does need to call the meeting to order like a normal meeting, and we do have some public comments, and then we can move on into kind of the discussion and have various parties chime in.
Mhm. Are we gonna have to end this session?
I think she adjourned.
So are we in a break now between,
Yes,
or are we?
if you want to take a break,
Okay.
otherwise we can start. Usually when we go from one meeting to another, we give everybody a couple minutes.
Okay, well, let's reconvene in about 3 minutes, 10:05, about that.
Bye.
Hi, Betty.
Hi, Bob. We just lost communication.
Good to see you. You got yourself unmuted. Good. And I'm glad to see Katie Dusick is with us.
Yeah, I'll tell you.
Ah,
Good
morning.
I just lost.
Now your face looks kind of familiar, I think.
Yeah, so does yours.
I hope I don't lose power again. I lost communication for a while there.
Don't we all?
God, it's crazy. I'm glad I got to go on that tour the other day.
Mm-hmm.
That was helpful.
Yes.
Hi, Betty.
Hi, Jillian.
Hi, I'm so sorry I didn't get a chance to welcome you to the committee. We were kind of coming and going there. So anyway, welcome. It's wonderful to
Thank
see
you, honey. I lost power, so anyway, I just got back on. I hope I can remain here the whole time.
Great. Right, we're about at our start time. I know we have a number of folks attending this meeting. We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order, and I think staff will be sharing the discussion here, so I will go ahead and turn it over to the staff to make introductions and move forward.
And we do have public comment. There was
thanks.
one person who requested to speak.
Okay, well, let's do the public comment then before we turn it over. Thank you.
Is she actually on here? Yeah, she's here.
Been called to order.
Yeah, she just called it forward.
So do we have public comment?
Yes, from Susan Glarum.
Can you hear us, Susan?
Susan,
Hi.
I think you're up.
I'm here. I'm here.
Oh, good.
I am speaking on behalf of the Ecola Creek Awareness Project, PO Box 181, Cannon Beach, Oregon 97110. Dear Cannon Beach Parks and Community Services Committee, city staff, OWEB, Cannon Beach Fire Protection District, Oregon Department of Forestry, Trout Mountain Forestry, and Greenwood Resources representatives. The Ecola Creek Awareness Project, ECAP, is an Oregon 501c3 organization formed to recognize, promote, increased public understanding of, and protect the unique environmental, economic, and social values of the Ecola Creek watershed. ECAP would like to express our continued support for the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, OWEB, conservation easement for the Ecola Creek Forest Reserve. It is our understanding that this easement does not allow for construction or improvement of roads for any reason except for maintaining the already existing roads to allow for the preservation, protection, and enhancement of conservation values. We urge the city of Cannon Beach to continue to adhere to the complete conservation easement agreement made with OWEB on April 3rd, 2012. We thank you for having this invaluable discussion today. It's vital that we all remain worthy stewards of this invaluable land. On behalf of ECAP, I thank you for your efforts to do so. I'm done.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Susan. Is there other public comment?
That was the only public comment that we had requested by the noon deadline yesterday.
Great, thanks, Kelsey. Okay, well, with that then, I will turn it over to Bruce and to make introductions and move forward with the agenda. Thank you.
And thank you, Jelaine. And Jelaine, the way that I see it is this is still Parks Community Services meeting. It is, you are the chair, but I will be presenting information on behalf of the staff.
Okay.
So anyway, I will go through some direction or some introductions. Barry Sims from Trout Mountain is on the line. Katie Duzick from OWEB, we appreciate her being here today. Mark Morgans is on the line, and trying to see, yeah, Chad Washington from Lewis and Clark. Yep. And the 971, I'm trying to make sure that we have Neil.
He's here.
Yes, on.
Okay. All right, good. Wait, those are all individuals that that we've been having discussions with. The discussion today is that there is a disagreement between staff and the committee, or at least the recommendations of the committee, regarding the impact of roads. And I want to make it clear to everyone that's listening, we're not suggesting that any new roads be constructed. What we're talking about is reestablishing the roads that are already in the ECFR. So we're not talking about new, we want to just maintain the existing ones. And this discussion, I believe it happened a while back. I don't have the date, I should. But we did talk about the staff concern that we kind of have an additional lens that we have to look at this project with. Actually, probably a couple lenses, but one of the main ones is that this is also the ECFR is also our watershed. Our watershed is our source of clean water and drinking water, potable water. And so we might be have a little bit of a different take on what it would take to protect that resource. So, and I might be misstating these, but so please, Jelaine, correct me after I make my statements. It seemed that there are two factors that have influenced the committee to take the position that we should not maintain or do more maintenance on the existing roads. One was the makeup of the forest. That's the species that we have there, some of the wetter areas, make it less likely that we will have a forest fire. And I'll leave that to the representatives of the Oregon Department of Forestry to address that issue when they speak. Second one is that the maintaining of the roads will increase human access and the possibility of forest fires. The others, from our standpoint, from the other side of that coin, is that if something like the power lines that run through the property cause a fire, we will not be able to access and potentially to get it while it's still small, and potentially it'll eventually burn out of control. The power line, in our assessment, is the most likely cause of a fire. And remember that the power lines would cause the Paradise Fire and the Camp Fire. Another thing is that when the reality of our maintaining the roads to increase the number of people that are in the ECFR, the road locations that we're talking about are 3 to 4 miles uphill. And the thought that I guess we disagree with the thought that because we maintain a road up there, that we are going to have people that are additional people that are going to be going into the ECFR. I want to point out that we did a trip with some of the board members this past Thursday, and did not see a single person. We were so far up. And we were on roads that were owned by adjoining property owners. So, and then finally, the staff is talking about the concerns about protecting the city's watershed. We feel strongly that protection in the form of access outweighs the factors the committee is relying on to keep fires out of the ECFR. And that not maintaining roads makes it much less likely that we would be able to defend a fire. So with that, I'll turn it over to Neil Bond. Neil is with the Oregon Department of Forestry. We went up to the site yesterday and walked through, and he has some comments. And we talked generally about the possibility of concerns or the possibility of fires developing in the ECFR. So if I can just ask Neil to go ahead and kind of talk about what we saw and what your thoughts are on the condition of the roads and the maintenance of the roads.
Yes, thank you very much. Appreciate that, Bruce and committee. Again, my name is Neil Bond. I'm the Protection Unit Forester for the Oregon Department of Forestry out of the Astoria District. I've been with the department almost 20 years, currently just a little over 9 years in my current position here. So just a bit of background about me there. As Bruce mentioned, we did have some concerns, not really concerns, but went up there and visited, took a look at the place. It is a very special place. It's a great place to be. It's something that, if the fire were to start in there, we would want to do everything we could to stop the fire as quickly as possible. You can imagine fires that, are small are much easier to contain than when the fire gets large. So the smaller the fire, the easier it is for us to protect that. That being said, the way we can get fires when they're small is we need to have access to them. We need to have good access. We need to have safe access. We need to have good anchor points where we can tie into these roads and non-flammable areas so that we can safely attack these fires without putting our firefighters at risk. The more access points that we have, the more options that we have, and the safer it's going to be for our fire folks, and the safer it'll be for everybody else. The way to think of this too is not only will this help the ECFR, but also if there was fire coming down off an adjacent landowner, if we have access points in the ECFR, we will be able to cut that fire off potentially a lot sooner than possible. If we have good access points and we can't get people in there safely, one of the tactics that is an option to us is that we may have to come to an area where it is safe to do it and possibly burn out or, do what we can to, safely fight that fire without putting our folks in harm's way there as well. Again, I've stopped trying to guess where people are going to go and where they are going to start fires. A prime example of this is we had the Cliff Fire 2 years ago, right on top of the ridge, right above the tunnel there. I don't know how people got up there, but they did, and they started a fire, and the fire burned over the cliff, and we had to get folks up there and attack it. The point with that is fire can start in a lot of unique places, and the quicker we're able to see a fire, the quicker we're able to detect a fire, the less damage that it's going to be. The last thing we want is for a fire to skunk around for 2, 3, 4 days until the weather conditions are right, and then it comes boiling out of there, and then it becomes a major problem for us as well. Obviously power lines are a huge concern as well. I think everyone's pretty aware of the power line fires that were caused by the fires over Labor Day of last year. I personally spent over 3 weeks down out of Springfield on what was called the Holiday Farm Fire. That was up the Mackenzie Bridge. And that was, incredibly destructive fire, and, was very challenging. And so granted, the frequency of fires maybe isn't as high as in other places, but if we do get the right conditions, the intensity is going to be there. It's going to create a lot of challenges for us, and the more access roads we have in there, the better. Something to remind the committee too, when we're talking about access roads, we're not talking about a 2-lane, paved highway. This is about a 14-foot road with gravel on it that allows us to get in there and create some tactics that allow us to effectively fight the fire, but also providing for safety as well. I know District Forester Dan Goody is also on this call. I don't know if he has anything to add to what I said there, but if not, I'm happy to take any questions the committee may have right now.
Well, actually, I think the committee will have some feedback, and certainly I have some things that I'd like to share regarding the situation and the recommendations of the committee. So I can do that now, and we can move through questions as we go on. We had an agenda, and I think we're diverging from that a bit. So Bruce, would you like me to go now, or how are we proceeding here?
Sure, if you'd like to go now, please.
Okay, great. Well, Bruce had asked the committee to share some of the discoveries that we've made about the ECFR, and we certainly have discovered a lot in the nearly 4 years that we've been working on the plan update process. And fire risk is very important, and it's it's an increasing concern, and that is why we that's why we added the fire risk assessment to the 2019 plan update. Now, the question of fire risk and road access in the ECFR was also considered carefully by the committee in its process, and again, reviewed later with staff and with forestry expert Barry Sims, who is really glad he's here today. Barry has a very long experience with the reserve. He was central in creating the original stewardship plan, and he authored the stewardship plan update, and we've been really lucky to be able to consult with him. So after that analysis of the forest and consultation, the committee recommended that no new road access or construction be undertaken in the reserve, and that efforts be made to reduce and limit human activity. Now, the city proposes opening up roads as a preemptive measure, but given the analysis, this proposal is really unnecessary. It more broadly, it can run afoul of OWEB's conservation values, and there are 4 good reasons why, and actually Bruce alluded to some of them. Fire risk and risk of fire spread inside the ECFR is quite low, and I'll speak to that in just a moment. The most prevalent cause of wildfires in this region is human activity, and if we can keep the people out, you can vastly reduce the risk of fire. And if you can prevent a fire, you don't have to fight a fire. The impact of upgrading old roads in sensitive habitat easily violate the OWEB agreement. And we already have access, as I'll point out, in the way that the staff has requested here. And I'd like to go back to a conversation that we had a year ago. This was in February of 2020, and you can listen to the tape on the city website, but this was a Parks meeting that the Parks Committee requested in response to a presentation by staff about thinning in the reserve. We requested that meeting because the issue of fire risk certainly came up, and the issue of road access was a big part of that discussion. We were just finishing our plan update, and so we asked Barry to come and speak to us about fire risk and restoration projects and the impact of opening roads in the reserve. And that meeting was really, really helpful. We got to hear in detail the specific characteristics in the ECFR forest that limit the risk of fire. We learned about riparian forests and hardwood trees like alder that are fire resistant. And that's good because we have a lot of alder trees. And we learned that the ECFR's topography and the floodplain forest acts as a natural fire break. And even in the more flammable conifer stands, there's good shade cover. We learned that there's relatively little fuel of the type that causes fires to climb into treetops. So even there, a relatively low risk of fire if you can keep people out. So if you don't have access, you're not likely to get a fire started. In this region, almost all the fires are started by people, 96%. And again, if you can prevent a fire, you don't have to fight the fire. Now, a really key issue here is that these areas are remote, as Bruce pointed out, and so they can't be monitored. And people do hike and mountain bike and hunt on the Greenwood property. The first time I took a tour up there, I ran into a bow hunter right at the border of the ECFR, as a matter of fact. So an open road on that boundary, even with a gate, it's an invitation to go and explore. And that issue, I think, really can't just be dismissed, especially when the city doesn't have any demonstrated way of monitoring who's in the reserve and what they're doing. Wild areas everywhere are experiencing more of this kind of pressure, and that's only going to get worse over time. So a year later, here we are again with another proposal to increase road access into the reserve. This time it's really framed in terms of fire safety. So I just want to briefly address that. On the map that you all have from staff, it shows the proposed roads. And you'll see there's a green line and a red line. And they look relatively equivalent, but they're really, really very, very different propositions. If you looked at a different map, if you looked at a map that showed the forest types, you'd get some important information because there are very large sections of that riparian forest that it essentially forms a continuous buffer between the conifer forest and Highway 101. Big sections of that type of forest surround the key resources in the watershed. And again, we learned that even if a fire did start in the conifers, it's unlikely to spread because that riparian forest acts as a big, wet, hardwood fire break. And it's a buffer between the conifers and the town. Now, staff has presented the need for these roads in terms that are frankly evoke alarming images, that they may need to end up fighting a fire from 101 or sacrificing the watershed to save the city. And it is a very alarming image. But the analysis of the forest type and the information that we have doesn't suggest that a fire would move in that way. Now, the tour that many of you took up to the Greenwood property, it was actually more like a snapshot because you saw one view of one location on the edge of the reserve, and you saw the top part of that proposed road. But downhill and away from that section is a recovering forest habitat. And what you can't see on the staff map is that a good portion, at least half of that road, is not a solid line, it's a dotted line. It's a very different kind of a situation. That proposed roadway goes right along the riparian forest. It is wet. There are marshes, there are tributaries, there are ponds, and it would put a road right into the heart of the reserve that is this type of forest. And I can't imagine what was it 14 feet gravel road would do to the habitat there. And our primary obligation as stewards of this place, and the city's primary obligation with OWEB, is to preserve and strengthen their conservation values and to protect and enhance the habitat. And once a road is opened up into that area, mountain bikers and hikers and hunters or anyone seeking new wild areas to explore are sure to follow. And how will the city monitor that? It's a specific question, and I think it needs a specific answer. The OWEB agreement states that the city, and this is a quote, must prevent unauthorized individuals from entering the property and eject trespassers. And how will that be accomplished? How can they monitor the activity? And once the door is open, it is very, very difficult to close. So limited access is allowed on the reserve, in portions of the reserve, but only, and this is another quote, if the use does not impair the conservation values of the property. And the question here is, how will the city be able to meet that obligation if it opens up areas that it can't monitor? Assuming that people won't go into those areas, I think is not sufficient when the evidence is that the primary risk of fire is people going into remote areas or going into these wild areas. And the thing is, there are real advantages to just leaving this area alone. I mean, first, it wouldn't become an obvious access point, so the fire risk is reduced. If it were necessary to have eyes-on look at any point along that proposed route, crews can do that easily on foot. And third, there's already an open access corridor. And I think this is an important point. And it has been pointed out that this is one of the points of concern. Under the power lines, it's in the very same area as the proposed road. And here, I think it's an opportunity for the city to really partner actively with the power company on prevention. There's already an easement, and it requires that that corridor be kept passable, and the power company does do that. So our conclusion here is that Road B is not necessary for the types of, given the types of forest and given the threats of access to the reserve, when there is already a nearby access point. And this is not going to increase protection to the reserve. I think it will create more risk than it would resolve. So that image of Road A as a solid green line on a gray map, it really doesn't represent what putting a road there would actually do to that habitat. It's very different up top than it is down at the bottom. And that green line traverses a significant transition. Now, I'm going to say just a really quick word about Road A. A lot of folks probably, that's the red line. A lot of people probably know Road A pretty well. And I walk this road from the creek to the gate probably once a month, year round. And if you spend any time there, you'll notice right away the tracks from pickup trucks. and the rock bed underneath the tracks. It's already a functioning road. Blackberries get mowed up at the top by the gate, and branches and fallen wood gets cleared. It's beautiful and it's quiet, but it is functional as it is. And if emergency access was required, you can get wherever you need to go on that road. It does run through some wetland, and it ends up at Ecola Creek. So a big road improvement project there might again run into the OWEB agreement. So I was going to also note some language in that OWEB agreement that's specific to roads, but we're lucky to have Katie here, so she can speak to that better than I. But I just want to say that OWEB does take an affirmative stance in favor of decommissioning roads. And the agreement with the city actually cites decommissioning roads as part of the work of the stewardship plan. There are many prohibitions on roads and grading and excavating and altering the land surface in any way. And the single exception to that, as was noted, is maintenance of existing roads for the preservation, protection, and enhancement of the conservation values. So it's important for us to take this specific forest system as it is. It's not a generic forest with generic fire concerns. And the analysis of this forest system says that the fire risk is relatively low. We have good riparian areas that form a border. If we can keep people out, the fire risk will remain low. And preemptively putting roads in where they're not needed is not an effective solution. The city commissioned a fire assessment as part of this plan update, and that fire assessment said that increasing access and upgrading roads and trails will likely increase the risk of fire ignition because people are the most common cause of fires. So I think this is important to consider. I think we're all looking to protect this land. I know that everybody here is looking through their own lens, but I think it's important to consider the big picture and the big stewardship mission here, because it is all part of a complex piece. So I'll stop there and turn it over to my colleagues on the committee if they have questions either for any of the speakers we've heard from already, or if they have any other input on this.
Jillian, I have a question. This is Bruce. The 96% that are human caused, what percent is caused by individuals walking through, setting a campfire, whatever, as opposed to power lines, slash piles, burning, that sort of thing?
Well, I don't have the specific breakdown of that, but I know that one of the causes that's frequently cited for fires is, for example, hunters lighting a warming fire, a small warming fire that goes awry. There are many ways that humans can cause fire, that is true. But it is certainly the case that if more people are coming in an unmonitored area, the risk of a cigarette, the risk of a small fire, the risk of a firework, the risk of some kind of ignition source that is due to people having activity up in those areas increases. And that's really the point. Now, power lines are power lines. We can create access under them. We can make sure that we can monitor them and keep them as clear as possible. But increasing the risk by increasing road access preemptively seems to me to be actually working contrary to the problem and to the issue that you're trying to solve. And then there's also the issue of environmental degradation. If you have mountain bikes through there, and we found this even in the parts of the reserve close in, it's very difficult to keep folks who want to be mountain biking and doing their recreational activities in the wild areas monitored and not doing that where they are not welcome to do that.
But you're not saying that we will reduce our risk by not maintaining roads by almost 100%? Because that's what the statistic sounds like, is that we're going to eliminate 96% of the risk. And it's my understanding there's a portion of it, the people being, misbehaving that cause these, but I think there's a larger percentage that has nothing to do with what might happen with the road?
Well, we have a fire risk assessment in our draft plan update, and it cites that the increase in access via roads and trails will likely increase fires because humans are the most likely cause of fires. So I see a direct connection there. And I will also defer to our forestry expert on that who made the assessment, but that is a clear connection. And so I think we taking steps that actually increase the likelihood of that doesn't make sense if we're trying to reduce fires. And again, if we can prevent the fire in the first place, then all of the concern about fighting one becomes moot. We all don't want to have fires up there.
Understood. Do you want to have Barry kind of go through? Okay, yeah. Well, I would like to hear from Barry as far as the fire assessment.
Neil has his hand up.
Yeah. Okay, can we hear from Neil?
Yes, thank you. I think there's a couple things that I'd like to point out that I think the committee should definitely be aware of here. It's one, granted, our frequency is low, but some of the biggest fires in the history of the state have occurred in this area. That was from the Tillamook burn of 33, 39, 45, and 51. So yes, our frequency isn't as high as, say, John Day or Eastern Oregon, but when we do have a fire, it is very intense and it is very high. And again, this easier that we have access, the better it is. If I'll just say it this way, as the person who's going to be on the ground fighting that fire, if it does ever start, if I can't get my folks safely into that area, unfortunately, what it's going to mean is we're going to have to back off to an area, probably 101 or a paved road, where we can have good egress, and then look at a burnout option, which certainly isn't anyone's first option, not what we want to do. But if we can't safely get in there and do that, that may be where we go. So just want to make sure the committee is aware that, yes, we don't have the frequency, but the intensity is there, and we do have the history of some of the biggest fires in the state occurring in this area in Northwest Oregon here. Thank you.
No, I just want to follow up with a question. What about in your experience and the conditions that Jelaine was talking about that reduces our likelihood of having a fire spread? Is that in alignment with your experience?
So basically, it's correct. Most of the fires are caused by humans. What I have found in my experience here is there's no rhyme or reason to why humans, where they go. You can say they can stay out of a place, but like I said, a good example was the cliff fire that we had last year on top of the ridge by the tunnel. People get in there, we have homeless people, not so much hunters, but just a lot of folks out there. And fires start in, if I could guess where fires would start, I probably would be a rich man here with this. But you never do know when fires will start. You do know that they are going to start, and the quicker we can get on them, the better it's going to be.
Well, and I'm sorry, I didn't ask my question well. I'm talking about like the riparian area and some of the different species that we have, that sort of thing, the alders. Is that, in your experience, does that provide any level of protection when something is started?
It can, certainly, but if the conditions are right, absolutely not. It will burn just as well as other things. Again, it's very dependent on the weather conditions, but it does have some potential for that. But again, if the wind's blowing and the indices are low and the fuel moistures are low, then that will not provide the kind of protection that I believe folks think it will.
Okay, thanks. Okay, thank you, Jelaine. I just wanted to ask, talk to Neil. Thank you.
Love to hear from the committee. Can we hear from any of the members of the committee if they have any questions for all these guests that we have that are outside experts?
I don't have any.
Nobody has any questions from the committee to talk to Oregon Department of Forestry? Okay.
I guess I have one. When you took them on the tour yesterday, did you go to the same place that?
We also, what we did yesterday compared to the tour we went on is they had not been up into the ECFR all the way to the springs in a period of time.
Okay.
And we were able to get 3 of their members that make these decisions during the fire season, all the way up to those locations. And then we were able to get them to the locations that we were talking about, the unmanned roads that need to be, our opinions are, need to be maintained. And they gave us some great insights, and you were able to see a majority of what they saw, but they had not been in the ECFR for quite a while. And they were quite surprised actually by the amount of forest that had gone near the power lines from the last time they had seen them.
Okay.
And we'll be dealing with the power company, and also in talking about how a fire that would need to be accessed, dealing with the power company.
Does anybody have any questions for Greenwood Properties, our surrounding neighbors that are all around us?
Does Mark Morgan have a comment?
Well, thank you. If I've got a moment. Yes, so my name is Mark Morgans. I'm the Director for North American Forest Operations for Greenwood. Actually, your neighbor too, both Colin from just down the street where I've been a resident in Cannon Beach since 1999 and managed the property adjacent to the reserve we own on 3 sides. So I'm quite familiar with it. I've also walked every one of the roads on the reserve. It's been a while, but back when it was Oregon Department of Forestry. So if I could have just a moment, I'd like to talk to you as your neighbor, both residential and a forest landowner, from a perspective of a forester and a firefighter. So we're big into natural resource protection and stewardship also. We heard that earlier. We're committed to that on our lands. I'm personally committed to it, having my wife and I both contributing to the acquisition of the forest reserve and recognizing the water quality importance too, approaching the city years back so they could actually expand some timberland ownership around the springs when it was recognized that our property line actually went within a couple hundred feet of the spring location. So we approached the city, made some land available at a very attractive price and helped expand the watershed. So I would say my observation of those roads are both an access for firefighting, but also seeing that there's some opportunities to improve them from an environmental perspective. There's not been a lot of activity on the past. And as Barry, I think, would confirm, and he actually shows in the management plan photographs of culverts that have washed out. And when those culverts aren't maintained and wash out, that's a big slug of additional sedimentation down into the stream. And then it leaves that area vulnerable to additional erosion from each storm event. Also, I think your map shows a couple of culverts on the north end of the property that are currently plugged. They're not working at all. And that means that the rainwater has to flow across the road grade that's there now, move sedimentation potentially down in the stream too. So I'm all for road maintenance, ideally for access to be able to use it in the case of emergency or fire response, but also so that you don't have that lingering environmental issue, which you've got in the reserve right now. And those roads at least need to be maintained ideally, or at least decommissioned properly. I guess the other thing I'd approach it with is as a firefighter, I think Mr. Bond explained that well. But being able to access that area for fire response, using it for tactics, and that to me also relates to the resource protection. If that does catch fire, what sort of watershed are we going to have after it's burned? What's that going to do to the wildlife habitat? So the idea is that we're actually protecting that resource as well as preventing that fire if it starts there, if we can get it stopped from extending into the city. And I'd really encourage all of you to spend a little time informing yourself on what happened at the Echo Mountain fire. You will see how fire that occurred over Labor Day this year. I mean, it jumped half mile at a time. It jumped right across streams, right across wet areas. It showed no mercy, consumed hundreds of homes. And that's the exact same habitat that we've got in our backyard. And so I'd encourage you to look at that, what fire can do. I laid awake here down the street from you without sleeping a wink that night for 2 nights in a row, I guess, thinking that if a fire started on those woodlands, we spend a lot of time thinking about the threats that are coming at us from the west and the tsunami. We got to start thinking about the threats that are coming at us from the east as far as a fire too. I speak with that with knowledge. I've actually responded to a number of incidents in the Forest Reserve as a volunteer firefighter in Cannon Beach Rural Fire Protection District for 16 years. So I can speak. I've been on apparatus that have driven in there and tried to access fires, and the constraints we had with access, how that delayed our response. We were able to get on them and keep them from going smaller or from growing larger, keep them small. But the other is some of the EMS calls we had where I responded as an EMT and a rescuer. One of them that I can think of was very fortunate. Somebody up in one of those areas accessed it because they could on a horse. The horse fell over, and luckily there was enough mud that she was not crushed because she fell between the horse and the mud. And it took a long time for us as responders because we could not use those roads. We had to hike in there. We had to get her out. And we all know in EMS, there's the golden hour, if you will, if you got to get to people quickly to be able to save them. So I'd ask you to look at this. I support the fire rationale completely, but also look at it from the environmental protection aspect. Take care of the roads you got. It's a responsibility as a forest landowner. You've got that responsibility, live up to it. And then also as a firefighter would be able to, or emergency responder, to be able to react to those, take care of people if they get hurt in there, and not just be, avoid a vision of negligence, of knowing an issue and doing nothing about it. So that's a little personal. It's coming from me both as a resident. So I'm asking you, somebody that represents me and my family in town. We drink the water from that watershed every day. Most of the roads that we're talking about improving are not in the portion of the sub-watershed that provides water. That it's the West Fork, if you're familiar with that, but where the city has springs and diversion rights off the West Fork. These are mainly all off the North Fork. So thanks for the time here. I appreciate that. Apologize if I got going. I'm passionate about it, and I can answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Mark, could you speak a little more toward the environmental? You were talking about culverts, and also I'm just concerned because I did see the trail that they were talking about clearing. I don't really want more roads, but I don't want fire. So I'm stuck in this really bad place of wanting something environmental and yet also knowing that the fire is a major danger. I need help to make some decisions.
Well, I'll try, and then Neil Bond from the fire response, and you've got an expert, with Barry Sims, did very well too. He's done a nice job representing you up in there. But again, I'd go back to that. There's a variety of different levels of road construction maintenance, and right now that road is it's in disrepair and neglected. So what we'd at least be able to do is get in there, work on to be able to, whatever water is captured by the road prism itself, get it diverted into the forest so that it can naturally infiltrate down in, fix some of those crossings. There's one or two really dramatic pictures from I've seen years back in the management report of where the culvert got plugged up and it just blew out. And those still have steep banks to them that every time it rains and gets waterlogged, that additional soil moves into that stream channel and down into the North Fork of Ecola Creek, as we know is a anadromous fish stream with coho salmon in it. There's also a way on some of those roads to, they don't have to be built up to the standards for carrying heavy equipment beyond what we think would be the size of the apparatus in there for the fire response. And Neil can give you a better idea on what that would be. And you would want a few of them probably there'd be core that would have be able to be rocked, because there's times that happen that fire response would occur. You might get a light shower, not enough to put the fire out, and you still need to fight the fire, and you got to get your equipment in and out of there. I could see the idea of rolling water bars in some of those places in there too, but really use the kind of the current science that's out there, and not build a freeway like was described, but that 14-foot wide road surface that would get equipment in there, would provide access, if they're emergency response for a EMS call, and almost make it a showcase. It seems like there's an opportunity in there. OWEB would probably verify is that there are OWEB funding grant possibilities that might be able to help with this. And as your neighbor, recognizing that whatever you do to improve your property, as well as both environmentally and fire response. I think we do a lot for ours. I'd like to collaborate with you. You know, if we're trying to improve stream health quality on our property, and then that flows down through the city's property, is that water quality doesn't degrade because it crosses your property after it leaves ours. And then again, some of the road systems would be as if there's access roads we've got that would complement your efforts. You know, we'd be happy to work with you on that, collaborate on those access points, because again, as Mr. Bond pointed out, that benefits us by being able to respond to that fire before it extends onto our property too. Does that help?
I just need more info. Thank you very much. Yes.
I've got a question for Barry, and it's kind of sparked by the comment about erosion and just more generally, Barry, I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts. But my recollection is that with the road survey and this, that you weren't seeing a lot of sediment in streams. Am I recalling that correctly? Could you speak to that?
Sure, yeah. It's true that there are some plugged culverts and some roads that probably should be decommissioned. However, in our surveys, we didn't see any active erosion, certainly nothing that would reach Ecola Creek. But, you know, Mark's point is right. You could have a prism failure. You could have a slide that would be a very detrimental event as far as sediment deposition, but we didn't see any evidence that had happened, you know, within the last 10 years, or that is imminent in our opinion, but doesn't mean it couldn't happen.
Great. And so just keeping an eye on that annually or so is going to help with that, I assume, just keeping track of where things are with that.
I think monitoring is a very important part of this. Yeah, I don't know if you want me to wait to go into some of my other comments. If there are other questions for other speakers, I'm happy to wait.
I think that would be a good time. I got you on the screen.
Okay. So yeah, again, Barry Sims with Trout Mountain Forestry. We've been involved in the Cannon Beach watershed, Ecola Creek Forest Reserve for over 15 years. And we're the primary author of the plan and the plan update that was just done, or draft update. I will say that we did do a fairly cursory, not cursory, but it wasn't a huge effort to do the wildfire risk assessment, but we did interview, I believe, Neil and Dan, and we did look at the database that ODF Astoria has on incidents over the past 50 years. An incredible database, by the way. And just to answer one of the questions that came up earlier regarding the causes of fires, I believe in the draft plan in figure 5, the number one cause of particularly the larger fires is debris burning. It's not incidental, like throwing a cigarette down or creating a spark. And so I'd encourage you to reference that figure. It's the most likely scenario is maybe a slash burning that gets out of hand during an east wind event. But I would like to kind of clarify, you know, some of my thoughts on the fire risk. And I really agree with what Neil said. Those forest types are unlikely to burn, but under extreme weather events, they certainly can burn. And we've seen that, you know, throughout the state in different variety of different conditions. So I think it is important to recognize that just because it's unlikely doesn't mean it won't happen. And I do think it's prudent to plan for that and have some kind of contingencies. And actually, you know, I note that the two roads that I believe Rick had drawn in on this map, Road A and Road B, those are actually existing roads that the power company uses on some kind of regular basis to check on their power lines. And so they're faced with some of these same challenges of access, and you know, they're out there on an ATV if the conditions aren't favorable for them to get a vehicle in there. And I've long wondered it seemed to me reasonable to bring both of those roads back up to a standard that would allow a pickup to reliably get down there and do monitoring, and not have to get out on a four-wheel vehicle or an ATV. So I'm wondering if there might be some compromise possibly. I see that the road B is showing as extending all the way down to the riparian area, and I'm not sure that that's maybe absolutely necessary. It goes currently to the power line. I'm wondering if the committee would consider those two road segments as kind of just a maintenance mode for both for the power line maintenance and also for emergency fire access. I hear what Mark's saying regarding the roads as they are now, and I would agree they're not sufficiently rocked. Roads can be rocked, and then over time, the amount of organic debris that falls on the road makes it unsafe. You can't find a place to turn around, even in the summer months. So, just adding some rock to those roads, I think is prudent. I realize I'm kind of going against what the committee is recommending here, but it's always been a little bit of a point of tension, the access versus, I think people want to reduce negative impacts and unwanted use of the reserve, but I think it is important to consider the responsibility for safety and for firefighting. It's a real issue. And I think also, in the assessment of the fuels, I pointed this out in the assessment that the most flammable fuel type in the watershed is the power line right away, because it's dense, a lot of fine fuels, a lot of really flammable vegetation. And if the power line were to fall in a high wind event or something and start a fire there, the worst case scenario in my mind would be a fire that's channeled down that right away by east winds, and that would kind of breach, it would sort of breach the protective buffer of the reserve, and it would get down into the city. So, all those factors considered, I guess my recommendation would be to try and come up with some kind of compromise that allowed for better access.
Barry, just quickly to clarify, do you see the top part of that green of the road? Is it road B, I think? Yeah. Do you see that as quite different? I mean, it becomes a dotted line it's a different map. And so it really is quite a different character when you get down into the floodplain, and it's very, very wet. And, as you know,
Yes.
how it is down there, it's very marshy and wet. And so when we're talking about putting a road with rock and, that could take a truck, it's just so different down at the bottom than it is up at the top. And do you see those as demonstrably different, and also in terms of risk? Because it would have a different impact, I believe, on the bottom than it would on the top in terms of, impact in the area.
Well, you're right. We mapped them as different road types because when we did the pilot thinning project back in 2013, we actually did put some rock down to the main log landing. And so that was essentially a dirt road, and we kind of upgraded it to a lightly rocked, I think there's maybe 20 loads of rock spread across there. And that was just to, we got a kind of a sudden burst in late August, and all of a sudden the roads were wet, and we had to add rock to get the logs out. So that was done. I do think you're right. That the road beyond the power lines, the very eastern portion of that green line, is a bit more overgrown, and it does kind of get down into that lower toe of the slope, closer to the riparian area. But the other, the portion between the power line and where we stopped rocking is essentially just a road grade that's there, and it's got that one plugged culvert that's kind of probably the highest risk issue. So maybe fixing that, repairing that, and extending the road down to the power lines, but not necessarily going further. And I'd be interested to ask Rick, or maybe some of the other participants could speak to the logistics of that additional extension beyond the power lines, if there was some specific rationale for that, or if it was just kind of, hey, the road grade keeps going, so let's just keep going.
Okay. Okay. First of all, thanks for your comments, Barry. And then this is Bruce. Anything that we do, I'm sorry, I've got a frog in my throat. Anything that we do, we will do with best practices. We will respect what the intent of the preserve is. We'll do all that, but I think that the recommendation from staff is that we will take a look at what the firefighters think is needed. And if we don't need to go through that area, and we'll work with Barry too, if the committee would like us to try to develop that. But I am not an expert. I don't think there's any experts on the committee as far as trying to say, to do a negotiation on what roads we would do and what we wouldn't. I think it needs to be a professional assessment. I think including Barry, because he's been a representative for so long and knows the property so well, that would be good. But to me, the issue is about whether or not we're going to do road maintenance for fire. And I know that people are probably tired of hearing me beat this drum, but there is a level of responsibility that the committee has for monitoring the plan, updating the plan in terms of protecting the Ecola Creek Forest Reserve. From the city, we have the additional responsibility of maintaining source of our drinking water. And I think that listening to what we've heard so far, there's one approach that's passive, but doesn't allow any other kind of intervention later on because it's being precluded. And so we've got that from the water side. And then also the possibility that if this can't be controlled or something can't be controlled, that we're going to have a fire situation in the city. And Chief Reckman was just talking to the council yesterday. Sometimes he's able to put 4 people on the fire. And yes, we have mutual aid, that sort of thing, but that doesn't help us if they can't make any access. So I think that, and I don't think anybody thought my mind would be changed, but I think I'm still feeling the same way as far as a recommendation to the council on the 13th. And but if there is a thought that we have further discussion about the roads, that sort of thing, on part of the committee, that would be welcome. But I think we kind of heard each other out, and I think that there's a possibility we may go in and have 2 different recommendations to council. So Jillian, I don't know if you want to.
Barry was raising his hand.
Okay, yeah, that's one. By some, to have a conversation with the committee now or another time. But I'm sorry, Barry, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure we had a chance to hear from Katie. I guess I would just say that we've worked on properties that have conservation easements quite a bit, some with OWEB and some with other organizations. And in my experience, this may not be completely true for all easements, but usually there's some allowance for kind of catastrophic and sort of unforeseeable events like a catastrophic wildfire, and trying to prevent something like that from happening kind of falls into that category of protecting the conservation values in my experience. But I'd be interested to hear from Katie at least at some point in the meeting here. So thank you.
Sure, and I'd like to hear from Katie, but she just found out about this yesterday, so I don't know how much time she's had to research, but
Well,
Katie,
I guess I thanks for that, Barry. And I think I would just like to note for those present in the meeting, the fact that Bruce just mentioned about OWEB being made aware of this yesterday. And so for the record, I'm Katie Duzick, and I'm the regional program representative with the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board. And I cover the north and central coast of our state. I'm a coastal resident myself, but I live down in Waldport. But I'm familiar with this property, having the pleasure of visited several times, checking out some restoration projects. And I also help with our acquisition program with the management planning. And just to pedal back a little bit from a process standpoint, as it was been mentioned several times, OWEB does hold a conservation easement on the property with the purpose of protecting the property's conservation values, which are defined in the easement as the ecological systems and processes. And so we do greatly understand the conversation around catastrophic fire and the need to make plans for that. But from our purposes of our easement, we're protecting the ecological benefit, not necessarily the infrastructure on the property that's geared towards the water system or public safety. Not that those aren't important, but just to give you a sense from where our funding is coming from in our perspective. And so in the management plan that is currently approved, it does talk about the need to address the roads for catastrophic fires. In our easement, road maintenance is allowed, although it is a little bit of a sticky conversation if we're talking about turning trails that haven't been maintained in quite some time back into roads. That gets into a little bit of a gray area of the easement, and we would probably take some review on our part to determine consistency. In the baseline document that was approved, there's only one road identified on the property, which is that main road that goes to the water system in the cedar forest, which I've had the pleasure of going to several times now. And so just from to talk about what happens if the city wants to make management changes, update needs to be submitted to OWEB for review and approval. And the last conversation that we had with the city about this was on November 5th, 2018. We had a call with Mark Barnes, who's now retired, and Jeff Adams, who was taking Mark's place at the time. And Barry was also on the call. And we talked about the roads and some of the updates that were proposed at the time. And there wasn't any, dramatic road maintenance plans. And OWEB was informed that we would get the plan for review in February of 2019, but we did not receive the plan. And so I'm just a little bit in the dark when you all are discussing this map that you're looking at that has the new roads proposed. And so I don't have a copy of that map yet that I've been provided. And so given the short notice about this ongoing issue, I'm sorry that I'm unable to provide a determination whether the proposal meets our easement requirements. But if something is submitted to us, we will review that and probably join a discussion about the intent of our easement when that plan is ready. So thank you for the chance to comment, and I'm happy to answer any questions about our easement. Dan's got his hand up.
So this is Karen. Katie, I just want to say thanks for joining us today, and I commit to you getting these responsibilities from Jeff, and I'll do a better job of making sure that staff and the committee keep you in the loop when we're doing these updates or have things that would deem your input on. I do want to touch base about a project that all of us are working on together, OWEB, the North Coast Water Council, our Parks Committee, and city staff, as well as Greenwood, and that's our beaver restoration. I'm particularly interested in being able to address those culverts higher up in our ECFR, because ultimately I think those areas are where we should be looking to create that beaver habitat that we've all desired, instead of lower down by Highway 101, which is near the critical aspect of our wastewater plant. And that's not an area that I would want any kind of beaver restoration to be built around, but we have so many other opportunities within the ECFR to do that. But what Mark highlighted about the condition of that culvert, is impacting that opportunity negatively. And if we're able to address that, I think we have great opportunity to create that environment higher up in the reserve. That would be great for everybody. So just something to keep in mind. That's a project we're all passionate about, and there's an opportunity here for that.
Great, thank you, Karen. And I certainly understand the staff turnover and don't mean to cast aspersions on the approach. And I get that. And I'm happy that OWEB has been contacted and is now involved in coming up with a solution here.
We will not repeat that mistake. And we apologize. And thank you.
Apology accepted.
Okay.
Yes, I echo that. I just have a quick question. You were talking about that it gets a little stickier with the trails into roads. And that really speaks to that whole second half of the Green Road, which is dotted line. And I've actually walked that entire section, from the North Fork all the way to Greenwood. So it has a very different character down at the bottom. It's very, as I said, just it's very different, and it is not a discernible road, I guess, in the way that you would think about it, looking at it from the top. So that really is, I was trying to envision what a gravel road that could take a pickup truck would look like down there. And then, so I just want to highlight that that's really what was in my mind when I was, when you mentioned that. And then there's also the red road versus the green road. There's this, I've always known it as the burn access road, but it goes from the west fork of Ecola Creek and it goes up to the gate at the Tolivana main line. And that, I saw that as a proposed road, but it also, I experienced that as something that is accessed already for maintenance, and I think the power lines and the blackberries and things like that. So I don't know if you have any comment about the potential differences there, and if staff or any of the other experts have a comment just about what we're talking about. They seem like entirely different animals. We already had pretty well established access on the red road.
The question I have to answer that is, first of all, the map that I provided everybody here, these are just the target areas that need access for fire service. Okay, they're target areas. They're not to scale, and they're not something that we've studied yet. They're the target areas that we have identified as a problem. The red line trail that you're talking about, as I walked it, I was unable to drive it because of the amount of trees that were across it. So it needs to be maintained, and the trees need to be cut back so that you could get a vehicle down there. And I walked that only 6 weeks ago. There were so many trees across it, you could not drive a vehicle. The other road, the green road that you keep discussing that goes into the riparian area, that's not necessarily to scale, but it's an access that goes right underneath the power lines that needs to be identified as a very, very important part where the main fire hazard is located. And that's the importance part of the conversation needs to be focused around those two areas. And we want to have these conversations with the Parks Committee so we can discuss the best way to move forward on it. As long as there's an intent to understand that there's a need to move forward to understand this together.
Yeah, understood. Absolutely. And I think that's really the question, because, access at isolated points, and it wasn't clear to me that those were general areas that you're looking at that appeared to me to be a proposed road route all the way down and deep into the reserve. And so if that is not the case, then I appreciate the clarification on that.
Yeah, and those roads had been established in the past. And so I wanted to make sure everybody knows that we're not talking about establishing new roads.
And again, it's quite different, the upper part versus the bottom part. It's where it is a marshy trail as opposed to the upper part, which is a, partially rocked road. So it's just important, I think, that we recognize when you see it as a line on paper, it doesn't translate the same way. And that was really my question, and appreciate Katie speaking to that. Just reversing something that's reverted more to trail has a different implication than, adding more rock to something that's already a pretty well-established road. So thank you for that.
And Jelaine, from the staff standpoint, you have our commitment that we're going to do the best we can for the preserve. We just have this, seems to be a relatively new element of a forest fire, because when I went through the original documents, it wasn't even addressed. So we just need to find the best way that we can do it without harming the preserve, but also having the opportunity to address seriously hazardous situations.
Yeah, and the other thing I would just really appreciate more clarification on, if not today, then going forward, is that question about monitoring activity. Because if this does prevail that roads are opened up and access points are visible in areas that have not been, that is a really key issue. I think there's the fire question, and there's also just the impact on the environment question. If you've got people going in and having recreational activities, so I mentioned just even on the pedestrian footpath, it was some months trying to track down people who are mountain biking there and really degrading the trails. So if it's in a more remote area and there's a road that you can get to it, that's a concern. And I think that really needs to be addressed specifically.
Yeah, I think
one thing I'd like to bring up on that is we should really talk to Greenwood Properties about that, because as we discovered when we walked out there with everybody and we were having an open dialogue, is that the only unmonitored area is Cannon Beach's ECFR for people entering and exiting. Greenwood Properties is a monitored area. Not only do they have people out there, but they have a monitoring system. We are the ones that don't provide that monitoring level. And I would love to have them comment on their system.
Or for us to become a part of their system, to work collaboratively with them, because they do have people that are on the trails checking.
And they require permits for anybody to be on their trails. And so if they don't have the permit and it's not on their person, when Greenwood encounters that person, they're advised that they can't come up there without a permit. So they have much stronger restrictions than we do. That's something that the committee could discuss if you want to implement something like that. That's something we can talk about.
And I think there may be a discussion also about the areas of the reserve that might be open to access versus areas that perhaps we, as opposed to just a no hunting sign, maybe it's a no trespassing sign in the very remote areas. So that there may be other conversations certainly around this, because I think the unmonitored access is an issue, and I appreciate the different perspectives on this, so we can follow up on this.
Okay.
And just let me know, excuse me if I'm interrupting. I'd be happy to have a discussion with you later, more details about how we do that. But yes, we've got a no fee, basically a registration system. We can go on our website within a couple moments, they're registered. And that way we've got a way to communicate with them. And a big part of that is as the fire danger increases through the summer, we're actually able to communicate to the recreationalists on our property and tell them, hey, we're in fire season now. And then when it comes time to close it, we don't want people on our property. We notify them and inform such. And then we have forest patrols that are out there verifying when people are out there that they've got the permit, and when they're not supposed to be out there that they're absent. So it works very well.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Mark. Well, Joanne, I think, again, you know the staff position going into the meeting. I think it's April 13th. Be happy to have any further discussion right now. I don't know what y'all's position is going to be. I don't know if it's something you want to have a meeting on before the 13th. We would be happy to participate if you would like us to.
Thanks. Yeah, well, I think we'll definitely be wanting to follow up. And I just like to ask the committee again, is there anybody on the committee who has, if another question has arisen, or if any of the experts, but anything that is maybe kind of percolating that hasn't been addressed, this would be a great time while we're all here.
Yeah, this is Dan Goody with the Department of Forestry. Good morning, almost afternoon. Had a chance to go out yesterday and had a great time. Just a side note, I used to be the manager for forestry that had the Cola Trek, as we called it back then, and worked with the city to exchange that parcel. So that was a pleasant experience, and I'm glad you guys are taking care of that chunk of ground. As Neil alluded to, the strength of our fire protection is a completely coordinated system, which is a partnership with landowners. And as the Forest Reserve, you are landowners, and under Oregon statute, you do have an affirmative action plan for wildfires, and so a lot of stuff that goes with it that I won't bore you with, but there's a nexus there in statute with that. But we want to align with your objectives. So from a forestry standpoint, we don't have a dog in this conversation, so to speak, but we can point out where some things makes it easier so Neil's guys don't get into a pinch when things go bad. And they do, seems like in like they did last Labor Day weekend where things happened. I saw fire behavior that I never imagined on the coast. As it described where it jumped from ridge to ridge. You're talking half-mile jumps. So that's the real challenge. And we had a good candid conversation yesterday about frequency of low-intensity fires and the small risk of a very catastrophic fire. There's a lot of ways to skin that cat, and I think finding some balanced ground to access while holding true to your conservation easement is a doable thing, where you can increase access, maintain the controls you're talking about as far as public access. I think it's all doable, so it's not an either or. I think it's you can make both of those good. And additionally, I think you can align this through a resiliency lens too. You're talking tsunamis, where are you going to go if the bridges go out on 101? So there's an integrated approach to look at this as well. We've got a nice tie through on Vollmer coming up and over. If all the bridges go out on 101, that would take some serious transportation planning given it's a one-lane road, but it's better than nothing. So I guess I would just suggest this is an opportunity to view not just this issue, but kind of an all-risk approach as well, given the infrastructure challenges in that part of the county. So we're here to help you guys solve your problem. We're used to wicked problems. We've got them all over the place. So let us know how we can help. And well, we've got Neil's a hell of a firefighter. I've been doing it for 34 years. So we're just here to have the info, and we can let you guys make the decisions you need to make.
Thanks, Dan.
Jelaine was trying to see if anybody else in the committee had any questions at all.
Hey, Rick, this is Les Sinclair.
Hey, Les.
Yeah, good morning, and thank you everybody who spoke today. It's been very educational for me. I'm a relatively new committee member, and I'm still playing a little bit of catch up. But I heard several times, I think several people talk about the risk of fire within the ECFR is maybe concentrated or at least proximate to the power line. Is there a way to view this where that's the critical access point, and we really aren't talking about needing access to the riparian areas quite so much as just the stuff around the power line?
I'd love to answer that. And you know what, I have a PowerPoint real quick. It's got a few pictures of slides, and I want to show you guys these slides, okay, if I possibly can, to answer this question. The key I want everybody to know here is it's not just the ECFR. You have to look at the surrounding area around the ECFR. And Mother Nature and people and everything else that falls in between, there's not an imaginary buffer that will hold all these things out of the ECFR. So you have to take in consideration what is the elements around you, what are the wind conditions, the weather conditions, and the natural hazards that are already inside the ECFR, and then the power lines that come in. So to just say that the power line area is appropriate is selling it short. It's just the largest hazard. When you have an east wind that comes through this area and funnels into that canyon, then it's just exacerbating the fact that you have a major power line coming through the ECFR. There's other hazards that come into Greenwood properties, for example, because they do log and manage that forest, and those forests have intrinsic hazards in there, just like the ECFR does. So if there was a fire that happened in Greenwood's property, even 2 miles away, and we had the east winds that we had this year, within minutes, if less than an hour, it would come to the ECFR. So it's very difficult to narrow down just one hazard, but we do have a major hazard with the power lines. And then what we saw last year in 2020,
There were 18 major fires that happened in the state that burned down 1 million acres. And out of those 18 fires, there were 7 of them that were blamed on lightning, 9 of them that were unknown, and let's just say those were human, and then 4 were categorized as human started. So overall, out of that, you had a much less percentage or a higher percentage that were started by Mother Nature. And the east winds caused 1 million acres to burn last year. And we saw this type of fire behavior in the 30s, 40s, and 50s in Tillamook. And even as close last year, what happened down in Lincoln City, that is the exact same topography that we have, and it burned last year. So when we have this discussion about what the hazards are and what we're trying to accomplish, the one thing is important to make sure that we maintain is that we're not alone. The ECFR is an amazing ecosystem that we're here to protect, but surrounding it and cutting through it are major hazards. And so I'd like to pop up just a little bit of here when we talk about this area, just so Les can understand, because he's one of the few people that didn't get a chance to get out into the forest with us. And it's important that we collaborate on this and we're not only looking at through our lens. My goal is to protect the ECFR, and it is that of the staff, and protection 100% means that we are taking in everybody's in consideration. So if we could just start from the beginning real quick, it's only 5 slides and I'm just gonna pop through it real quick. So this first slide here is basically the map that Barry produced for us, and everything that I'm using right now is all from Barry Sims' paperwork and the stewardship plan, and he does a really, really good ability to define what we're actually looking at. This is a great map, and it's something that we need to become more familiar with. The red lines around that are the ECFR, and everything on the outside of it is Greenwood properties or private property. And that's what we have to realize is if you see some of those roads coming into the ECFR or ones that have been there in the past, is that a lot of things can impact us. Wind, Mother Nature, people accessing it inside and outside. Let's go to the next one. As we looked at those areas, I took them directly where those power lines, and Jelaine said something about a snapshot. I wanted to show the most dangerous snapshot, which is at those power lines. And when we got everybody up there, we also walked the trail that goes down into the riparian zone, and we weren't able to get that far. But realistically, I wanted to show them that access point, and I brought the firefighters up there with us, with the committee, mostly so they could really realize that that's where the firefighters are going to stop. They're going to go to that high point. They're going to try to penetrate down into that area, and they're going to stop right there, and they're going to say, "We are not going to go any further, and we're going to take a defensive strategy on the entire ECFR." Now, if I go to the next slide there, these are the maps that also were provided by Barry that I added, just target hazard areas that we need to maintain the ability to have some type of access. And these are the things that are not to scale, but those are just the 2 areas that are very difficult to get access to. The red line and the red on the right side, the red line has actually already pretty well maintained road. It just needs to be maintained with people looking at that closer, and we need to make sure that we put resources into it. The other green map line, that is the one that goes right through that hazard zone where the power lines come down, and that's something that we need to consider. And then, like I said, it's not to scale, but it's already a road that exists. Let's go to the next one, please. When we look at the scale here, this came right out of Barry Sims' report, and this is the stuff about man-made fires that we need to really look at that. And the slash burning on the left, that's one thing that I asked Mark Morgans and Barry about specifically is those areas, when it comes down to it, is they've done different techniques with those areas, and they no longer are burning in those areas. And they're using different techniques to reduce all those hazards. And if you look at the right of that scale, that's where the percentages are of the amount of fires that are started by people, okay? And that's something that we have to realize. All this work has already been done for us to make very, very good decisions, as long as we're willing to collaborate in our lenses that we're looking through. And it's very important that we keep that in mind. The next screen I have for you, next slide I have for you, this is last year's fire behavior in the state of Oregon. And if you look at last year's fire behavior in the state of Oregon, you look at the Echo Mountain Complex where Mark Morgan's talked about. That was an unknown cause that burned up 2,500 acres out of Lincoln County. It was September 7th through the 21st, and it destroyed 293 structures. They were simply lucky to evacuate the area, and that's the truth. This is not something that I want to try to bring back from the Tillamook fires of the 30s, 40s, and 50s. This happened last year. That is why my concern is when we start looking at this, we don't just look at the power lines. We have to just realize that we're all in this together realistically, but in general, this is common. And this happens in other parts of the country, and it happened to us last year. So when we look at the access, it's very good for us to get on top of that area. When we look at Pacific Power and what access they have and the maintenance that they need to do in the near future, we need to be very respectful for the level of risk that they're bringing into the ECFR. And we have to be respectful of our measures that we have to put in there to protect the ECFR.
Thanks, Rick.
Les, is there any questions that you have for me besides that?
No, thank you, Rick. I appreciate you laying that out for me.
Rick, last year when I got so many phone calls about the burning over in Seaside, and I asked you what that was, and it was a permitted burning. What risk does that present to Cannon Beach if that were to get out of control? I mean, what are the levels? Is that high risk, moderate, low, based on its distance and Seaside to our ECFR?
It really is a low risk for us when it comes down to it, because permits can only be authorized during certain weather conditions. And that's why it's important that we all pay attention to shutting down access to ECFR or shutting down access to greenwood properties, or shutting off the access to people to do their own burning. And that's why it's so important that when we do see maybe an unchecked fire in Seaside, and we all look at our watches and our clocks and realize, oh my gosh, this is a non-burning time of the year, and they have a fire going. In those situations, it's very dangerous. And that's the human element that we can't control. If somebody's on their own property, not paying attention to not having a permit or non-burning times, and they start a fire and it can get out of hand, it goes back to what Neil said initially. We can't control what everybody's doing. And so we have to be prepared to react and mitigate those things when they happen and keep them small. But that's when they pose a risk to us, is when they're not supposed to happen.
Human cause is not always somebody with a cigarette tossing it down on a trail. It's that kind of stuff.
Correct. That's correct.
Rick, may I share some observations and suggest a comment for consideration by the committee?
This is Chad Washington, everybody. He's with Greenwood Properties, and he's working directly under Mark Morgan's in our exact forest.
And he was with us.
Yes.
Okay, I didn't recognize him without mask.
Yeah, I don't have my mask on, so you don't recognize me from the tour. It's interesting. This conversation appears to be weighing the balance of road maintenance versus environmental protections. And I just want everybody to understand that those don't have to be in conflict, that those two actually go hand in hand. And the requirement of the easement to develop a management plan to enhance and protect, as well as preserve these conservation values, a well-maintained road system for fire access actually fulfills all of those things by mitigating sediment delivery, reducing the risk of road failure due to a saturated road prism, open culverts that allow clean water to get out of the ditches. Our goal is to get the water off of the roads and into a ditch and out of the road prism. I would suggest that you all take a look at what they do in Washington with the road maintenance and abandonment plan and come up with a miniaturized version for yourself that highlights priority access roads, designate those for maintenance so that you reduce the environmental impact of an unmaintained road system, and then properly put the other roads to bed with a phased strategy where you're maintaining the roads that you need for access. And I also don't think that will increase the user group. I think what you will see is the users will use those maintained roads more, which from my professional opinion, I consider safer. Rocked road for someone to mistakenly or negligently flick a cigarette butt is much less likely to cause ignition than someone on a unimproved trail where it's going directly into the brush. That being said, I think concentrated recreation on the road systems is not a bad thing if it reduces the recreation on more fire-prone trail systems. I'd be happy to discuss our permit system with anybody, and we also employ some of the best contractors, in my opinion, that are experienced working in sensitive environmental areas, and we'd be happy to offer our we actually have a kind of a stewardship program where we're willing to do all of that work for you, and you just tell us what your goals and objectives are, and we can use our economies of scale to get the work done at the best price by the best contractors that have a history of working in sensitive environmental areas. So again, I would just suggest you look at what they do in Washington with the road maintenance and abandonment plan. Identify the roads that you need for fire access so that you can continue to preserve and protect this ECFR, which is so special to everybody on this call. I don't think there's a debate here. I think it's how do we align the strategy so that we're all happy? And I think it's possible. And that's all I've got. Thanks.
Thanks, Chad.
Thank you, Chad.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the idea of being really active and clear with what we are actively decommissioning and having a plan for that's also a really good idea. We'll leave it less ambiguous, kind of just across the board. It'll be less ambiguous. So I appreciate that.
Will also help your emergency management planning team to know what is going to be available to them. And so they can have more of a preemptive plan instead of wondering, are these roads open and available or are they not? And trying to figure that out during an emergency.
Thanks. Julian, do you have anything else or?
I don't think so. I think we'll be wanting to have some follow-up and discussion. And I really appreciate everyone's input and the different perspectives today. I know this has been a long path, and I don't know that we'll meet entirely in a synchronized way, but it definitely feels like this has provided a lot more information and a lot more perspective and insight today. So I appreciate that very much.
We appreciate the time that the committee has taken to hear us out. So thank you. And also appreciate all the folks that are lined up on the right side of our screen that have an interest and are willing to support us and help guide us through difficult times. So thank you to all of you.
Yeah, this is a good foundation to go forward. So thank you all.
Especially appreciate Katie, who found out about this yesterday.
Thank you so much, and we will be looping more frequently. So, thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Well, if I have the gavel again, I guess we will adjourn for today unless there's anything else. And thanks to everybody. And I'm sure we'll be reaching out and having continuing conversations. So wish everybody well and thank you all.
Hey, thanks, Ryan.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.